To start off, we'll let you know a little bit about
Welcome to RetroWare TV.
You are more resourceful than earlier reports indicated.
To finish off my video series on Westwood Studios, I thought I'd review the game that could possibly be blamed for the developer's eventual liquidation. Whilst Command & Conquer Renegade wasn't the last game released by Westwood, that dubious honour would go to the massively multiplayer game Earth and Beyond, it was an extremely ambitious project that failed to meet the critical and commercial success expected by Electronic Arts. The entire goal of the game can be nicely summed up with this sequence from one of the early cinematics. Renegade is Westwood's attempt to put the Command & Conquer fans right into the action of the game that they love. Set during the course of the original Command & Conquer real-time strategy game, players take on the role of Nick Havoc Parker, a GDI commando much like the ones you sometimes got to give orders to in the first game, in a traditional first-person shooter. The game pulls no punches when it comes to fulfilling fantasies of exploring the world of Command & Conquer, with familiar elements such as buildings, vehicles, and even sound effects popping up all over the place to keep the atmosphere where it needs to be. But what about the actual game under the fan service trappings? Well, for the most part it's pretty average. The shooting mechanics aren't great, with a lot of weapons being stupidly accurate at long range, and others, like the grenade launcher, being worse than useless. There isn't much in the way of punch to the gunfire, and killing enemies just isn't very satisfying, particularly when a lot of the time you'll be taking advantage of the atrocious AI that's just happy to run straight towards you. There's some interesting technology at work in Renegade that was quite revolutionary for the time. As well as running around on foot, the player is able to take control of any unoccupied vehicle they find. And sometimes these are essential because levels can be absolutely massive in this game, transitioning seamlessly from outdoors environments to interior sections that are impressively complex. Unfortunately, this leads to probably the worst part of Command & Conquer Renegade. Sometimes it's in no way clear where you're supposed to go next. The problem is that the objective marker points directly towards the next objective and doesn't take differences in height or obstacles into account, meaning that a lot of the time you'll be wandering around the level exploring every possible route before you find where the game wants you to go. Frequently you actually need to go in the opposite direction to where the arrow is pointing, and it can be very frustrating and kills any momentum that the action manages to build up. To make matters worse, the game features one of the least helpful mission maps I've ever encountered. Speaking of technology, the game isn't that much to look at. If, like me, you think it bears more than a passing resemblance to the original Unreal Tournament, you'll probably be surprised to know that this was not an Unreal game, but rather used a modified version of the same engine as Emperor Battle for Dune. That's not a bad thing in and of itself, but when you consider that the game came out 3 years after Unreal Tournament, and more importantly 4 years after Half-Life, you can understand how it failed to impress graphically in its day. Such shortcomings are easy to forgive today, but the game still looks very flat and lifeless, with little weight to objects and very feeble explosions. On the upside, the actual presentation is top-notch. The game departs from Command & Conquer tradition by featuring in-engine cutscenes instead of the usual real-life actors, and they're very impressively put together, featuring dynamic camera work and some pretty good, although deliberately cheesy writing. Of course, they're still using the now rather outdated character models, so the dramatic tension can occasionally be broken by a vacant stare or total lack of any emotion on someone's face.
Yep, she's pissed.
The area that Renegade garnered the most critical praise in its day was in the multiplayer mode, which allowed players to face off in a first-person recreation of a Command & Conquer skirmish, with teams able to earn credits with which to build vehicles to use in combat. Unfortunately, like Nox, this aspect of the game is all but dead by this point, so it's hard to say anything about it. Coming out the same year as Battlefield 1942 can't have helped either. So, is Command & Conquer Renegade worth playing today? Probably not on its own, but if you pick up Command & Conquer the First Decade collection, it's at least worth trying for the novelty of seeing so many familiar aspects of the universe from a completely different perspective. It's certainly not a bad game, but just doesn't do anything to rise above being totally average. It's a bit of a shame to end this series on a down note, but unfortunately such is the way of developers that are forced to close their doors. However, the relative lack of quality in Westwood's attempt to make a first-person shooter does not tarnish their previous achievements, and the studio's contribution to PC gaming as a whole cannot be understated. Its influence lives on in both the continuing popularity of the Command & Conquer franchise and the very DNA of most modern strategy games. And whilst that may be its legacy, let's also remember through the games I've talked about that there was a lot more to Westwood Studios than just real-time strategy.